Cat People is an unusual moment in 80s horror because it's this attempt at legitimacy. You know, you got all the horror guys doing their stuff, but then you've got Paul Schrader, who had written Taxi Driver and had written American Gigolo and Mishima, and he's more or less a respectable filmmaker, and here he is getting in on the shapeshifter trend that was started by American Werewolf in London, so that's very interesting to me. He casts it with Nastasia Kinski and Malcolm McDowell. It's like raising the game a little bit.
That movie brought a sort of Euro sensibility into American horror that I found really, really interesting.
Cat People takes the sort of barest lift from the original's premise and makes it more about these siblings who have this sort of borderline incestuous relationship.
You've got to make love with me as brother and sister.
The transformation is actually almost like watching a work of art. It's very different in its purpose.
They'd seen what had happened in The Howling and American Werewolf, and so they're taking it into this other space. And what I like about the Cat People transformations is that they're both kind of different. Malcolm McDowell likes being the cat, and so it's kind of a different thing. But Nastasia Kinski's transformation is painful, and she's not into this. Tom Berman and his crew thought about that and sort of worked the character's feelings into the transformation and made it a very painful, uncomfortable thing. And it was just an interesting pivot from where we had been just a year before with Baker's stuff and Botine's transformations.
Basket Case is an amazing, super low budget movie. I love New York of that period as well, and that's one of the last movies that captured Times Square as it was, you know, that really grimy place that you would not go to unless you were looking for drugs.
There's a lot of weird, seedy New York stuff that you don't get to see anymore on screen.
When Belial throws his tantrum in the hotel room and suddenly we're in stop motion and we're smashing TVs and stuff, that's when like we kind of all went. That's when you learn that you're in this unsafe space. They're like, oh, this guy is not playing by anybody's rules and he needed stop motion for the scene and he's going to do it. That's where Basket Case crosses over into greatness for me.
Frank Henenlotter, the director of Basket Case, once said to me, I'm a strange little man. And he is. There are things that he would put in a movie that, you know, most people would recoil from. And in fact, there are scenes in Basket Case that are so sexual and violent and gross that the crew of the film actually walked off and left the film. There's one shot at the end of Basket Case where Belial, the monster, is actually on top of the female lead. She's completely naked and he's obviously doing something that you don't want to think about a little scrawny monster doing to a beautiful woman, but I think the shot has to be in the movie. By that time, you have to see that.
Thank God that Henenlotter got to make those movies when he got to make them, where he got to make them, because they were maybe the last gasp of that grindhouse thing.
Poltergeist.
There's a certain kind of horror film that says big studio production, big studio budget. That means it's safe for people in the suburbs to go see it. And Poltergeist was one of those movies. No matter how scary it gets, it was okay to take the family to see that particular movie.
Another movie that kind of just highlighted that horror can be just as much fun as, you know, any kind of other roller coaster tentpole movie you were seeing at the time, like Indiana Jones or something.
What is this little girl in front of the TV with nothing on it? Because when we used to actually snap our channels and you hit the snowy UHF channel or the channel 4 or whatever didn't come in your region, you're like, ugh, get off of that. This girl's sitting in front of it, intrigued by it.
Hello?
What is this about?
Anything that dealt with kind of suburbia, dealing with like aliens or old ghost spirits, I don't know, those really appealed to me. I just felt like all of us live in some form of suburbia now, and who knows what Indian graveyards we're all like living on top of.
Poltergeist takes an old staple of the horror movie, which is the seance, the communication with the other side, and amps it up about 100 times. That's the genius of that movie, I think. Let me set the record straight. Tobe Hooper directed Poltergeist. There was a horrible, scurrilous myth that it was ghost directed by Steven Spielberg because it was executive produced by Steven Spielberg, and because it has that Spielberg glow about it. But every Robert Zemeckis film was executive produced by Steven Spielberg and had that Spielberg glow about it.
Toby was a really good friend, and I miss him every day. I got to watch him work on Poltergeist. I was on the set. His mark on the movie is indelible. Steven Spielberg is a very powerful producer. He hired Toby because he loved Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When the storm is happening and all of the coffins are coming up and spilling out all the corpses and the like, it's very surreal and very Toby. You know, that I think is probably the most Tobe Hooper scene in the movie. And yet it's a collaboration of two incredibly powerful and unique filmmaking minds who come to the same destination from opposite directions.
I never wanted to remake The Thing from Another World. That was one of my favorite movies. I was a big fan of Howard Hawks. I just never wanted to touch it. And along it came. And it would be my first studio film. I couldn't say no. I thought, well, what am I going to do that's different? And decided, well, one of the things is I can go against the cliche and actually bring the monster out into the light and show it. I can do the imitation part of the story, which was not done in the first movie.
Childs was like your strong silent type. He didn't have a whole lot of words. To have Roger Mosley to thank, because I believe he was the first consideration for The Thing. And then he got Magnum PI, and that changed his world and mine.
Damn it, Childs, torch it!
Rob Bottin's work in The Thing was amazing, but it came at a huge cost to us.
Rob Bottin did an extraordinary job, creating the thing that was morphing into this and morphing into that.
It could look like anything that they wanted. So when they started designing the effect sequences, they thought about it in terms of this thing's been to 1,000 different planets. The DNA contains stuff that looks like tentacles and crab legs and spider legs. That was just miles beyond its time and just throwing all the rules out.
The most fun was Norris's head hitting the floor, and out come these little legs and eyeballs.
The best part of that scene isn't even the spider. It's everyone's fucking reaction as they just go. They all turn and they're just like, are you seeing this shit?
You gotta be fucking kidding.
And then they light it up. But it's that moment of like a real human reaction that sells that whole scene.
The first time I saw the movie, I went, whoa!
The special effects and them being so out front and explicit were the reasons that I got criticized for The Thing.
The barf bag movie of July, I have some problems with it. The story is totally implausible, and the movie just basically is an excuse for this very gruesome and repellent creature to gross us out. It is the most nauseating thing I've ever seen on a movie screen.
They wanted me to be more like the original, more classier. Blood test scene is my favorite scene in the movie. It's just a great suspense scene.
The strength of one person or one group's paranoia can spread. Makes everybody look at everyone else differently. In fact, even the way you look at yourself.
It's a crock of shit. We'll do you last.
It was a great Donald Moffat moment. The first time that we heard, gentlemen, I know you've been through quite an ordeal.
And when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch!
We cracked up, but we were also like, like freaked out. That's my favorite moment in the movie.
Halloween 3,
season of the witch, the night no one comes home.
I thought, I don't think there's any more story in the Halloween movies. Why don't we veer off and do something brand new? And that's what we did. Shows you how wrong I can be.
There were a whole lot of people who were deeply disappointed, to put it kindly, that Michael Myers was not in it.
Everybody wanted more of the same. And what do you get? You get this kind of like company that's creating Halloween masks that melt children's heads off and turn them into like worms, snakes and spiders. I mean, it's incredibly dark, man. You know, it's that whole plot to take over the world through a holiday that everyone loves.
Tom Atkins in Halloween 3 is very interesting to me because he's like a 70s anti-hero in an 80s post-Spielberg plot, which is an interesting juxtaposition.
I thought he was crazy, out of his mind. He's hanging onto a Halloween mask. He wouldn't let it go. And what he said was, they're going to kill us all.
We find this den of iniquity and evil in the far north reaches of California with Colonel Cochran. When we were driving through that town, we felt like we were being watched. It was really spooky, creepy kind of town. Garn Stevens, my first wife, is in that movie. And she is Marge, whose face is eaten in a motel room while she's sitting there reading. And Stacy and I were in the next bedroom, and she was in this bedroom. I always thought that was kind of awkwardy.
8 more days to Halloween. Turn that down.
3 more days till Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 3 more days till Halloween, Silver Shamrock. Boy, did we hate it by the time we were finished shooting it.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
After Halloween 3 came out, that sunk any idea of doing Halloween as anthology stories. That was the end of it. Halloween 3 was not a very big hit with people. They wanted to see the guy with the mask and the knife.
We'd already been conditioned to think that Halloween equals Michael Myers. If Halloween 3 was Halloween 2, it would have been a hit, and we would have a whole different Halloween franchise today. It should have never been called Halloween 3. It should have been just called Season of the Witch, and it might have done better.
If John was able to mount a yearly or every other year Halloween anthology, just called John Carpenter's Halloween, the expectation was that John was going to give you yet another iconic character. That could have worked out just fine. It just didn't work out that way.
Well, Tommy Lee Wallace, I thought he did a wonderful job directing and putting together Halloween 3. Nobody sets out to make a bad movie. People have very much rallied to it and embrace it. It's a good standalone movie by itself. Doesn't need Michael Myers and never did, and if they're disappointed, tough.
Q is perfection to me. I love seeing Q the Winged Serpent flying over New York and all his stop motion glory. There's just some great Larry Cohen-isms where there's like somebody on the rooftop doing push-ups and there's a guy just going, okay, he's counting them off, and then Q comes in and steals one of them. It's so good. It's such a weird, campy movie. I love it.
We went to New York. I had 1 day's prep. We got the helicopter the next day. We shot all the helicopter stuff. And when I brought the picture to the special effects people, they said to me, oh, you did this all wrong. You're supposed to come to us first, and we outline it and we draw everything for you, storyboards, and tell you where to put the monster and where to put the actors, and everything is all planned in advance. And you've come in and shot the whole picture, all the footage, and now you expect us to put the monster into it. And I say, yes.
He shot with Dave Allen doing stop motion. So poor Dave had to figure, he had all these helicopter backgrounds that are bouncing like this, and he's got to figure out how to put his monster in them. But it works out great.
These guys who do these effects, they're meticulous guys, but they have a very narrow focus and not much of a sense of humor.
Creepshow.
Creepshow is the reaction of the sort of the Spielbergification of horror from two guys in the cheap seats in Bangor, Maine and Pittsburgh. So Stephen King and Romero get together and they're going to make their funhouse horror movie. It's unlike anything Romero had ever done, and it's unlike anything King had ever done. And I think that informs the energy of that movie. It's 5 short stories. There's not a dud in the bunch.
They're all moral fables, every single one of them. You know, the one with Leslie Nielsen deals with greed. He wants to get revenge on the man who's seducing his wife and stealing her away from him. E.G. Marshall, who wants to remain closeted in his little insular cocoon. Vivica Lindfors, whose father treated her badly, but she still shows up for Father's Day, and she still goes to his grave.
Happy Father's Day.
Nathan crawling out of his grave is amazing. That musical sting, boing, when the hand comes out, it's magic.
Beyond the fact that it has great effects and I want my cake. You can't not talk about that segment and not talk about Ed Harris's dancing. It's the greatest thing ever. I think that's one of the fun things about 80s horror is you see a lot of actors who now have gone on to do like prestige movies and these big things, but they're all in these like weird, quirky little roles in 80s horror. And you're like, wow, that's kind of cool. And just getting to watch like somebody like Adrienne Barbeau, who I knew from The Fog, playing like this crazy, ditzy, drunk lady yelling at her husband all the time.
Out of my way, Henry, or I swear to God you'll be wearing your balls for earrings.
She was nervous about playing such a bitchy character.
And then you get to watch her get eaten by this beast in the crate. It's a movie that offers a lot for everybody.
I love Fluffy. I love the creature in the box. I love Delia and her birthday cake. And I love seeing Ted Danson buried in sand and all of that. But the most memorable part of that is Stephen King covered in meteor shit.
Yeah, meteor shit.
Meteor ship.
George Romero said, is there anything in there you would love to do? I said, yeah, I would love to play Geordie. He said, well, Stephen King's going to play that role. Would you do me a big favor and play the dad in the wraparound, the beginning and the end? Stephen King's son, Joe King, he played my son, and I threw that comic book into the garbage can out front. And then he voodoos me to death at the end over my cornflakes. But I had to smack him early on. And Stephen was never out of the room. Tom, you're not going to hurt him, are you, Tom? You're not going to really hit him, are you, Tom? You know, he is my boy. You're not going to, he's only 9 years old, Tom. You're not. And I said, Stephen, come on, I'm a professional actor. How do you wrangle the hundreds of cockroaches, you know? Some exotic cockroaches were allowed to escape into the wilds of Pennsylvania. Don't tell anybody.
It's such a pivotal movie that didn't get them the credit they deserve, I don't think. Because in the years following that, Twilight Zone the movie comes out the next year, and then Tales from the Crypt comes out as a series. But I think it all stems from Creepshow.
With the success of John Carpenter's Halloween, we did see a lot of films sort of come out in response to that idea of, well, if we have this holiday and we can turn it into this moment in the genre, why not capitalize on that?
Oh, ha, ha. Ha, 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 ha! That's really funny, you guys!
And we did see the onslaught of My Bloody Valentine, April Fool's Day, Leprechaun, you know, basically cashing in on St. Patrick's Day. And, you know, we saw a ton of Christmas horror come out, especially in the 80s with Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Yeah!
The recurring theme of having a holiday become a horrific experience. It's an obvious grab. Whether it's Carrie or Night of the Creeps, these are prom night movies but they go horribly different than what you're expecting, because it's supposed to be your coming of age and celebration, and like prom night movies are transition into adulthood almost.
Senior prom for 1980, Nick McBride and Ken Patton. These two seniors were selected by their fellow students as the most popular.
Valentine's is supposed to be all about, you know, your significant other, and that smashing together, or that juxtaposition of what's supposed to be good and, you know, lighthearted and celebratory into, holy crap, this is bloody and evil and people are dying. That idealism and that adolescence that comes to a screeching halt when it slams into something horrific.
There's a universality to these moments in the year, and I think that's a good way to sort of bring the genre into that fold.
Videodrome.
The relationship of body to mind is a potent one in Cronenberg's world, and I think particularly in the 80s, he attacked it with quite a bit of relish.
Cronenberg had a history of really getting at the psychic horror around physical afflictions. Videodrome was a step further, sort of saying we are entering a period of humanity, of human existence, cultural existence, that is going to fuse technology and the body in organic ways.
Television is reality, and reality is less than television.
One of the most potent sequences to me is when James Woods' character sticks his hand in the vagina-like slit in his stomach that has developed. His hand becomes a flesh gun. You have a very Giger-esque image of machinery and flesh and metal becoming one and shooting out cancer bullets, basically, that cause a decay of the flesh of the victim, which you shoot with these bullets. And it's unbelievably imaginative and potent and allegorical and repellent all at the same time, but devilishly entertaining.
It's all about video cassettes, and you look at it now and you just think, gosh, this is so like arcane. But it's really genius, because it really was predicting in many ways where culture was going and how much more involved the average consumer was going to become pre sort of where things went in the information age. And Oblivion is this kind of cross between a cult leader, a political figure, and a complete low-grade huckster. It's predictive of the darkest side of the Reagan era, of like where those types of people would lead us as a culture. Also very prescient. The movie really encapsulates the beginning of the transition of global culture, from analog into digital, from how the consumer took in their media and what impact that had on you. No matter how often you see it, it will get under your skin.
Haunting, mysterious, sensual, strange, perverse, riveting. The Hunger.
Well, horror films of the 80s, even the ones made on slightly higher budgets, still had that kind of down and dirty feel about them. They didn't feel like commercial movies, even if they were being made by the studios. And you had a lot of directors like Tony Scott, for example, doing The Hunger and bringing a very different kind of European aesthetic to a big budget studio assignment.
The black box,
The Hunger was such a sensual, sexy movie. It was just melding this scary, creepy vibe with, vampires. And it was all just so kind of sexual and creepy at the same time.
Forever and ever.
A lot of people dismiss The Hunger for being nothing more than style. I disagree, because I think the movie is specifically about style and about emptiness.
John?
What's scary about it is the disposability of relationships, and how Catherine Deneuve, as soon as her lover becomes too old, she can't even bear to touch him or kiss him, just puts him in a box, stows him in the attic, moves on to the next one. That's extremely horrifying, and, a universal horror that, all of us have experienced if you live long enough.
22 years later, Norman Bates is home. Psycho 2.
You don't think of Psycho as a slasher movie, but that was what kicked it all off. That's what inspired Halloween, which inspired everything afterwards.
Psycho was the beginning of my love of movies. It was psychological, it was visual in ways that you'd never seen before. Before Norman Bates, Anthony Perkins, there wasn't a serial murderer. There wasn't a killer that had psychological dimension. That's all Hitchcock and Joe Stefano.
It was inevitable that he would return in the 80s because that was an era of cinematic horror that celebrated the serial killer, the slasher, and he was the original. He was the granddaddy of them all.
Richard Franklin came to me, an Aussie director who'd done Road Games, and said, let's do Psycho 2. And I said, you are crazy. This is prior to sequels being a way of life in the movie business. Nobody wanted to do it because you knew you were going to get ripped apart by the critics.
In Psycho 2, Norman Bates was afforded a great deal of humanity and sympathy. He's been released from prison, he served his time, gone through his therapy, and he's sincerely kind of apologetic for having snapped and killed all of those women and his mother. And he's just trying to make a go of it, trying sincerely to be the best version of himself, but society won't let him be.
Look, not only is he crazy, he's chicken shit, too.
And so they turn him into a monster again. So by the end of that movie, he is sort of returned back to square one.
I'm sorry, Mother.
Everybody's dying around him, but he doesn't kill anybody, but we don't know that to the end. He finally does kill somebody. This little old lady who admits that she's his mother and she's been doing some of the killings, and he serves her poison tea. And as she starts to gag and die in the poison tea, he picks up a shovel and brings it smashing down on the back of her head. And it's the first time that he's killed in the entire movie, and you realize that he's totally insane.
Now there's a new name for terror. Cujo.
I remember having to audition and screen test for a movie off this giant book that intimidated the crap out of me. I was supposed to read before I auditioned, and it was like, this is a movie about a mom and a kid stuck in a car with this dog? It's like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty scary. For 2/3 of the movie, it's two people in a car, right? If you get out, you're dead. And if you stay in, like, no one's going to find you and you're dead. And it's sort of like the original escape room. Anytime you put a young kid in a scary story, it really brings it home, because you never want harm to come to a child. And I think that resonates on a biological level with every human being.
I was more terrified of Cujo than I was of werewolves. The terror felt real. The panic felt real. You could feel the heat, the stifling stagnancy of being inside that car with them, and the desperation of, well, how do you get out of this? And as an adult, it's interesting because now I watch it and I feel kind of bad now for Cujo. Whereas as a kid, I was like, you know, screw that dog. And like now I'm like, oh, but he got bit. And I feel bad for him now. So it's interesting. But as a kid, Cujo was terrifying. And I think that's what makes Stephen King's stuff so great, is that he knew how to prey on your fears, and it wasn't always the same fears.
Sleepaway Camp. You won't be coming home.
Sleepaway Camp is such a great little film because you're not expecting a lot from it. You're thinking, oh, it's another campground killer film. It's mostly like younger kids that are getting killed, and that's such a big no-no today. It's really scary, it's really done well, it's got some amazing effects for such a small little film, and it's just really entertaining.
Sleepaway Camp breaks all the rules. It's an upside-down slasher, and I think that's part of its appeal. All the males are sex objects. Look at those camp counselors in those booty shorts that cut off all the circulation in their, genitalia. The females in the movie are all monsters.
Well, say something, you
spoiled little bitch!
And of course, it has that final shot that's one of the most memorable moments in all of horror history.
I remember watching it with a bunch of friends for the first time. We knew nothing about it before the internet was spoiling everything. And back then we had no idea. We're, hey, this sleepaway camp, a horror movie in the woods, and we're watching it and enjoying it. And then the end came. Me and all my friends were just, what?
How can it be?
Christine came along after the thing, and it was a Stephen King novel, haunted car movie. It just seemed right to do.
Do we live on? Do we have a spirit? Can it live on in a 1958 Plymouth Fury? That was taken on by Carpenter, and he made it his own.
It's so lean, it's mean, it really gets to the nitty-gritty of what you would want out of a movie about a killer car. And I think Keith Gordon actually gives one of the best performances that we've ever seen in a horror movie of the 80s.
Why don't you just be straight with me, okay? You've had it, right? Well, fuck you, bitch!
There's a scene in Christine where the bullies had just destroyed the car. And the kid is standing in front of the car and he says, show me. And just the music kicks in. It's like, show me.
Christine put itself back together again. We had to figure out how that worked and was convincing, so we pull the car in and shoot it in reverse. You've got hooks on the car and you just crush it. And then in reverse it opens, it becomes. And it worked out pretty well for us.
It's an amazing effect for something so simple, but it's done so well. And matching that up with his score, it just works perfectly. I'm getting like goosebumps thinking about it. It's so good.
I never wanted to work in 3D. I'm not just a gimmick deal. It always has been.
I was always intrigued about what 3D could be, and I'm still waiting for it.
The first 3D horror movie I saw was actually one of the 1950s classics, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. The Gillman had a huge impact on me as a kid. 3D lasted only a very short time in the 1950s. There was this revival of 3D that began with the movie Coming At Ya. That kind of kicked off this whole wave of new 3D movies that were done in the 1980s. Producers saw this as one more way to make a little more money. You had a number of franchises that happened to be up to their third sequel, so it just seemed to make sense that, hey, we'll do version 3D.
I like where things come at you. Popcorn comes at you. A harpoon comes at you. And it was spectacular.
Really notable, first off, because this was the first time that Jason Voorhees actually put on the hockey mask. Every few minutes, something pokes you in the eye. There are so many 3D moments in this movie. They find reasons for characters to have yo-yos and baseball bats and all kinds of fun stuff that they can stick into the camera. And then there are some really great 3D deaths.
It messed with the storytelling because you had to wait for the 3D gag so people to go, oh, look, there's the machete.
There's a character who gets speared on a pitchfork. Probably the greatest moment in the film is when Jason squeezes a character's head so hard that the guy's eye pops out right into the camera. The first horror 3D movie in the 80s wave was Parasite. It marked one of the first screen appearances by very young Demi Moore. I have a pair of Parasite glasses here. It was shown in polarized 3D, directed by Charlie Band, released by Embassy Pictures. This is a promotional kit that they put out for the movie, a pop-up promo that shows you the Parasite. Also released in 1982 was a picture called Rottweiler, also known as Dogs of Hell, or Rottweiler, the dogs of hell. Genetically modified dogs that have been trained to be military weapons that end up in this small North Carolina town where they go on a killing spree. These are Rottweiler glasses. 3D can enhance a good movie, but if you're already starting with a dog, the 3D isn't going to really do much for it. Amityville 3D came out in 1983, directed by Richard Fleischer, an early screen role for Meg Ryan. There's a pit in the basement that apparently leads to hell. There are some really good 3D moments in the movie, and the pipe comes right through the windshield and ends up sticking right into your face. There's a swarm of flies that's sort of composited in and meant to look like it's coming off the screen. The moment that everyone remembers, this demon pops up through the hole in the basement floor and grabs one of the characters.
Save yourself!
The big three of the 80s 3D horror films were the ones that were all the third sequels. So the studios found interesting ways to promote these 3D movies, and Jaws 3D was no exception. Another pop-up where the shark comes right at you. The third dimension is terror.
Which I think this would have been a better movie if it wasn't called Jaws, and they just called it like Sharks in 3D, or Shark Attack coming at you.
Young Leah Thompson made one of her first screen appearances as one of the water skiers who gets attacked by the shark. The plot takes place at this aquarium, sort of SeaWorld kind of place. Probably the best 3D moment in the movie. The shark has already eaten Simon McCorkindale, and he was holding a hand grenade. The arm with the hand grenade is still in the shark's mouth, so they reach in and pull the pin, and the grenade goes off, blows up the shark, and all these shark bits come flying right at the camera, including the shark's jaws.
Having a giant, bloody underwater explosion in 3D, that may be why I give that 3D movie a pass.
I don't think that the 3D really helped any of these movies improve their box office. For the most part, the studios were using it just as a gimmick. I should note that in 1991, the sixth movie in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, Freddy's Dead, the big climax of the movie was a 3D sequence. It's kind of a shame that they waited until the sixth movie to do it rather than having a Nightmare on Elm Street 3D back when they could have.